Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Alex Kopytko here, and it's been a while. I got to say that right up front. It's been a while, and I'm kind of getting those jittery feelings again, being back. For a while, I was so used to doing 2 or 3 podcasts a week, and now it's like, oh my gosh, the emotions are getting back, the energy's getting back, the nervous energy's getting back. But we're here, Centered from Reality podcast. Just a podcast where I am going to try to understand the extremes because I think this nation is in a very interesting point right now. And we can either see what happens or we can fight to maintain just the values that have created one of the most progressive and also fascinating republics in human history in a lot of ways. But anyways, I'm Alex Kopytko, coming to you guys from Chicago, Illinois. It's been quite a move, I gotta say. The moving was a bit of chaos, to say the least. And I'm sitting here, windows are closed. I do mind to tell you guys right off the bat that there could be some noise. I'm not in rural California anymore. I'm not in a basement in Madrid. I am on a busy street. So I'm gonna try my best to mitigate all the sound, but you just never know. Also, there's a weird restaurant across the street that every time at 6:30, right on the dot, starts playing recycled violin versions of The Weeknd. So Save Your Tears is just kind of stuck in my head at this point. And it's 6:45, 6:50 now, so I'm hearing that at the moment. So hopefully you guys don't. Anyways, if you don't know me or if you're just tuning in, I am a political junkie. Used to do the Tonic Accord podcast with a good friend of mine. I currently write for a political economy lab at a think tank out of Africa, the Africa Center for Strategic Progress. And I am a graduate student at Northwestern, so I'm interested in public policy and public administration. So, yeah, that's pretty much the background. But today I want to kind of get started because there is so much going on right now, and it's a lot of stressful stuff, to be completely honest. It's not a lot of good news, whether you look internationally, whether you look domestically. But today we're going to stick with domestic stuff just because I've been off for a while, and I have a lot of things to talk about, mainly about the former president. So anyways, I'm still kind of working on a format. I think it's going to be 2 episodes a week, probably Tuesday, Thursdays, with guests. Today, there is no guest. It's just going to be me. So sorry, guys. It's just me ranting. But anyways, we're still kind of working on the formula. But we are going to be out there for the time being, at least for this episode. It's going to be Podbean only, while Apple Podcasts is approving everything. But soon it'll be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, all that jazz, just like the Tonic Accord before. But today I wanted to begin with a metaphor. And in a moment you're going to see why I'm using it, so just kind of bear with me. But 2 years ago, when I was working in Spain, my mom visited me, and we went to the northern coast, Catalonia, in a region called the Costa Brava. It's kind of it's on the east coast of Spain, south of France. Beautiful, beautiful place, by the way. And one day we went swimming in this secret cove, about 5 miles from the village we were staying in. And the Mediterranean was warm. It was a beautiful day. But in the distance, there was a lonely cloud, right? There was a lonely cloud, and we're going, that's a pretty menacing cloud, but it's so far away, and there's only one of it that it's not going to be a problem. So we're like, yeah, we're just going to stay and eat and swim and drink and be jolly, And so all I know is that about 20 minutes later, it was just a huge cloud that had kind of manifested across the sky into a giant cloud. It was getting dark. In the distance, you could see rain. And within the next 10 minutes, it was over us, and it was pouring rain. Lightning was all around us. We had to get into the trees. We had to run for cover. And it was kind of weird. I ended up losing my phone. It got too wet, so I think my phone broke, something like that, got waterlogged. And we finally made it back to the village, kind of ducking under trees because the lightning was closer than we wanted. And so we're like, geez, you can't underestimate a small cloud in the distance. I bet you're kind of wondering why I brought that up, right? But believe me, it makes sense. So over the last few weeks, or really months, I think that's kind of what's happening with our democracy and with the former guy, President Donald Trump, or ex-President Donald Trump, right? Since he left office, there was the election, there was the big lie, there was January 6th. There were the voting restriction bills passed. There's the failed audits. And now Trump is back doing rallies, spewing more bullshit than ever before. And, a lot of people think the cloud is far away. It's gone. Or it isn't even menacing. But we need to keep our eyes on it because one day it could be a tiny cloud, but 2022 or 2024 could turn out to be a hurricane. And that's kind of what I want to focus on today is that cloud in the distance. 2022, 2024. Do we worry about it? And so I'll get to my own thoughts a little bit later. But I want to start with an article that a lot of people have sent to me. I've heard it on, doing its rounds on other podcasts and news sites. And that is by Robert Kagan. And he writes for the Brookings Institute, as well as, I guess this one's in the Washington Post. I'm not actually sure if he writes for the Washington Post, but he's a guest opinionist in it. And it's called Our Constitutional Crisis is Already Here. So already really, really happy piece. But basically what Kagan argues is what people like me have been worried about. He just thinks the U.S. might be on a collision course for a very bad constitutional or even bigger democratic crisis. He writes that the stage is being set for chaos. In quotes here, imagine weeks of competing mass protests across multiple states as lawmakers from both parties claim victory and charge the other with unconstitutional efforts to take power. So yeah, I'm not going to focus on the majority of the article just because a lot of it, to me, is similar issues that a lot of us have talked about for years. But there's a few parts that I think he's articulated well. The biggest part to me that I like to reiterate is the stop the steal messaging, that kind of followed not only the election, but mainly January 6th. And I would argue it mobilized some of those people out there. That mix of social media, QAnon, 4chan, 8chan, all that jazz. But the problem is that the Republican Party's done a very good job under this lie that Trump propagated to have local politicians control state elections in ways that are very antithetical to democracy. We need to remember that in the last election, states that were highly contested like Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, they had election officials who could have been Republicans who did the right thing. They kept their job and worked with integrity. But now, I think of Georgia, like off the top of my head, Stop the Steal has actually made it so they've passed legislation that puts vote certification in the hands of the legislature. And to me, that's a red flag because legislatures are elected partisan officials, especially in a place like Georgia. And it's alarming because what happens if, say, a Democrat wins in Georgia and instead of an election official who certifies the vote and tries to stay out, now the legislature, which is mainly Republican, does that? The same could be said if the Democrats controlled the state legislature. But to me, it was never about limiting who can vote, which the Democrat Party's forced to kind of talk about. Instead, to me, it's about who certifies the vote. And the Republicans have done a terrifyingly good job of changing that. And it's all around Trump's big lie. Anyways, I want to read kind of an interesting part of this article from Kagan. And he mentions that there is a growing tribalism that has superseded what the founding fathers were worried about, right? And it was something the framers probably didn't even intend to happen. So Kagan writes, the framers did not establish safeguards against the possibility that national party solidarity would transcend state boundaries because they did not imagine such a thing was possible. And what he means here is that the founders created a very bogged down republic, democratic republic, I guess you could say, that created checks and balances and pluralist institutions so that tyranny would be stopped or at least slowed down, right? That's why if you want something passed, it's going to take a while because it has to go through so many instances of red tape, checks and balances, bureaucratic institutions. It's really hard. But I think what the founders didn't understand is that could tribal politics supersede state and local politics, right? Like the founders were all about states' rights, a federalist system. But to me, it seems like both parties in some ways, but the Republican Party in a more dangerous way is going towards a national platform, which is kind of based around Trump, the big lie, and a lot of populist rhetoric that to me is antithetical to a lot of conservative values. But that is something the founders, I don't think, ever really looked at. Could a political apparatus that could supersede our checks and balances actually be a party? Later on in Kagan's article, he actually addresses Trump specifically, and I think this is a really interesting part too. He writes in quotes here, because Trump followers share fundamentally conservative views, many see Trump as merely the continuation of the Reagan Revolution. This is a mistake. Although most Trump supporters or some Republicans have become Republicans, they hold a set of beliefs that were not necessarily shared by all Republicans. Some Trump supporters are former Democrats and independents. And I kind of butchered that quote there, sorry. But I think this highlights a very important point to me. Trump's base is different from a typical Republican base. It seems to be more centered on skepticism, resentment for how the world is going. It's reformative nostalgia. Look at the past, but don't actually acknowledge some of the bad parts of the past. It's mixed with economic grievance, distrust of elites, and a hate for the globalized world. So it's really not the Reagan party. It's kind of this conglomerate populist movement that doesn't like complexity, doesn't like nuance, doesn't like conversation. And what makes this even more interesting is that Kagan also writes that, again here in quotes, for millions of Americans, Trump himself is the response to their fears and resentments. This is a stronger bond between leader and followers than anyone has seen before in U.S. political movements. End quotes. And, that is where Trump, to me, is really crossing the line into demagoguery. He is a leader that is bigger than just himself. He's not, usually the leader is backed up by the party. But in this case, I think the party is backed up by the leader. He is an idea. A lot of people may laugh at that because I don't understand how Trump could have done that. He's an elite kind of buffoon who doesn't really respect American values because he never lived them. But, you can laugh at it, but a lot of people don't. Also, the second part of the article that basically alarms us, alarms me, is that time is running out. Republicans, either from fear or their own voters' fear, or trying to stay on Trump's good side, don't seem to care. I remember Adam Kinzinger, one of the Republicans I still really cherish, he said that behind closed doors, most Republicans laugh at Trump and think it's all bullshit. But they don't do anything. And I think it's because they're afraid of their voters. They're afraid of the tweeter-in-chief or the ex-tweeter-in-chief condemning them to obscurity. But Kagan in this article ends by worrying that Democrats may fail to secure our national elections. So far, the Biden administration and Democrats have not done as much as I was hoping in that sphere. And along with disregard for filibuster reform, Kagan he worries that this could lead to 2022 being pretty bad. And if Republicans do get, sorry, we got a horn there. Always love it when a horn honks. But anyways, what Keegan and myself worry is that we haven't done enough to make our elections secure. And 2022, if some of these Trumpists who don't seem to believe in fair elections get into power, it might be too late by then. So, Kagan ends the article just by talking about how Republicans like Romney need to start kind of a constitutional Republican committee and convention that, at least try to work with Democrats about maintaining more of a constitutional order and what our Republican values are. And when I say Republican values, I mean our republic, not right or left. So we'll see how that goes. But the thing is, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are the only ones talking. So it's an interesting article. I recommend everyone checks out this piece. Again, it's on the Washington Post. It's called "Our Constitutional Crisis is Already Here." And it's probably pretty accurate. Now, I've seen some reactions to this article, mainly from Politico in the week. And, they bring up some good points. They downplay some of Kagan's concerns. One criticism from Politico is that Trump and Republicans are incompetent and desperate, which is true. I don't disagree with that. So it's going to be easy to know what they're trying to do. It's kind of like in a game of poker. They're so desperate they're going to show all their cards, right? But again, this isn't poker, this is politics, and millions of Americans support whatever Trump is doing. To me, crazy actions and crazy rhetoric, especially what Trump is doing, are happening in the public. They're happening in plain sight. And sometimes it makes it harder to condemn that because people are not really used to this. It's kind of the opening of the Overton window of what is acceptable. Trump did say, when he was running the first time against Hillary, he said he could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue in New York City and nothing would happen. And in this sense, in some ways, I think he's metaphorically done that with our political norms. He's metaphorically shot them on Fifth Avenue. And because it's so blatant, no one's really taking note. And so that's why I don't buy the desperate argument. I think Republicans are desperate, yes. But to me, the more desperate they get and the more likely they feel they are to lose in 2024 if Trump were to run again, which I think he is, I think they're more likely to do desperate things. Now, enough with that rosy piece. Unfortunately, the next part, I just want to give my thoughts on some other aspects of kind of what's happening. a lot of it's not happy right now. I hope down the road, especially when I start bringing in guests, which I think our first guest is going to be this weekend, I hope things will be a little bit happier, or maybe not focused on this, but for now, that's how it is. But anyways, I want to start next with John Eastman. That became public, I guess. I mean, he didn't become public last week, but new things that John Eastman did became public last week during Bob Woodward's new book. Disclaimer, I think Bob Woodward's style of journalism is sometimes taken out of context, and I don't know if I always trust his reporting, but it looks like John Eastman's memo has been corroborated. So, little backstory, I went to Chapman for my undergrad, where John Eastman worked in the law school. He was a prominent figure at Chapman's law school. And from the times I'd seen him, met him casually, he seemed relatively sane. And just like your kind of typical conservative law professor, more on the right in terms of how he views constitutional law, blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, time has shown that he really is a kook. He's the type of guy that makes me wonder if the Trump era changed people like him, or rather there were people like him that were kind of simmering, that were already nuts, just under the surface. I don't really know, but either way, he's a complete kook. He was the one who put out a paper, I think over a year ago now, that said that Kamala Harris could not be vice president, using some weird, almost birtherism type of argument, saying that, her parents were immigrants. It was weird and obviously very racially tinged. And so for those who don't know, Eastman wrote a memo, according to Woodward and now being corroborated, describing a legal route for Trump to steal or at least keep states from certifying Biden's election. Eastman wrote a way to dismantle elections. It was kind of a step-by-step scheme by which Vice President Mike Pence could single-handedly overturn the results of the election. This would be done by having Pence choose opposing certifiers in highly contested states, and then throwing those out based on the confusion of that. And again, I'm not a constitutional, I'm not a lawyer, but that's kind of what I've gathered. And it would basically just throw out millions of certified legal votes, and this could lead to an electoral map in which Trump could win, or would win. And it's alarming and very blatant. Luckily, and I don't usually give Mike Pence credit, but luckily Pence did the bare minimum and was a man of principle and I guess wasn't game for this, so that's good. But honestly, this case is nuts, right? Like this, from what I've read around the internet, legally this case was nuts. But situationally, it could have worked if there was a VP that was other than Pence who was actually willing to go forward with it. Going back to that Kagan article for a second, what happens next? What happens next time? What happens in 2024 if Trump, runs and it's a highly contested election, and if he picks someone more sycophantic? We knew already that Trump had the lies, the conspiracies, and the mob on January 6th. But now it also appears like he had a legal plan as well. And that's why this Eastman guy is kind of terrifying. I'm glad that he's been completely just rejected by a lot of the legal community. But it's to me a smoking gun, and it's been a disservice that the media on both sides hasn't talked about it. You would expect Fox News or OAN or Newsmax to not talk about it, but it's been kind of brushed away. I'm not saying anyone's done it on purpose, but there's so much going on in the news cycle that this story wasn't talked about much. But it's basically the blueprint for a legal coup, and I'm surprised there wasn't more to it. So going off those lovely revelations from the John Eastman memo, I want to talk a little bit about audits and the rallies that Trump's been doing. So I'm assuming by now that those who follow politics have seen what happened in Arizona involving the so-called audits and that company called Cyber Ninjas that helped carry the new audits out, right? There was the bamboo conspiracy that ballots were shipped in from China. They've done multiple audits in Maricopa County, yada, yada, yada. And this Cyber Ninjas group did a very biased audit of Maricopa County. And somehow they still found that Biden won even more votes than previously thought. Geez. I mean, that's just kind of ridiculous. That's really some sad irony, right? That this cyber group, partisan, clearly on Team Trump, probably on Mike Lindell's side, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, they couldn't even help their man, right? Instead, they did a fake audit for a fake election fraud claim, and it actually helped Biden's legitimacy to a lot of sane people. It just shows how ridiculous this whole thing is. I wish you could stop at that. I hope this would settle things. When a Trump-biased audit group still finds no fraud. But I wish I was right, and of course I'm wrong, right? That's just kind of where we're at. Trump has been back in the media since this. He's been doing a lot of rallies, which is interesting because he's been gone for a while. He's kind of been quiet. He's kind of like that cloud I mentioned earlier, that when it went away into the distance, or like as Bill Maher says, the shark goes back out to sea. But now it's coming back. Just last week, or I think it was weekend, he did a rally in Georgia. And he's continuing the big lie. He's not holding any punches, even though, what is the big lie at this point? And it's getting even more divisive and nuts and angry. He hates Democrats. The border, it's all about the horses are being demonized and the, ICE is being demonized. It's not like, immigrants or Democrats are good people. It's very divisive rhetoric. But he's also doubling down on the election fraud claims, just over a year before the midterms. Obviously, he's coming up about the right time. And, it's interesting to see him just as divisive as ever, and he's still just sticking to these claims. Now, in Georgia specifically, I sometimes wonder if all of these claims are actually going to help the Democrats, because he's basically, him and other Republicans, all these audits, all this rhetoric, all these rallies, what are they actually doing to bring out Republican voters? They're basically telling Republicans elections don't work, so it's all fraudulent. So what's the point of voting? So I wonder if this helps Democrats. In Georgia, when Herschel Walker apparently is running against Warnock, space there for a second. I wonder what happens when Republicans have been told elections don't work and they're all fraudulent. Does that decrease voter turnout? But, I'm not going to go on a diatribe for that for too long, but to me, the true fraud here is that Trump is continuously delegitimizing elections that so far seem to be fair. Yeah, there's fraud. There's fraud in every election. But the more they keep digging, it seems like most of the fraud was done by Trump supporters, especially in Maricopa County. Mike Lindell is a grifter. To me, he's more fraudulent than anything Democrats are doing. And it's breaking our democracy. It truly is. Governor Abbott in Texas, who has just become just a disaster between COVID and the big lie and abortion rights, which I don't even want to get into today, but probably down the road we'll do an episode on that. Greg Abbott in Texas is going to launch an audit. And you might say, well, he wants to see how much they lost to Biden by. Wrong. Trump won Texas, and they're still doing an audit. I think it's ludicrous, but it's clearly just symbolic. It sends out the message, and it sends out the process it's creating. The Bulwark, Charlie Sykes, said back in May that the Arizona audit was just a dress rehearsal for how they're going to handle 2022 and beyond. And we're seeing that now. We are seeing that. They are absolutely correct. So I know I've lumped a lot in here today, kind of about Trump elections, what's happening in our democracy, but it's all correlated. It's all connected. And I think it's important, and this takes me to the last rant I guess I'm going to do here today. Drew and I actually talked about this back on the Tonic Accord as well. Many philosophers have always worried about the flaws of democracy from the beginning. Aristotle says it inevitably leads to mob rule and mob violence. The demos, the people, are sometimes hard to control and sometimes get misinformed, corrupted, whatever it may be. And if you have a demagogue in power, they can use the mob to do their bidding. And I think we kind of saw parts of that on January 6th. We've also seen parts of that on the left during some of the Antifa protests and some of what's been going on college campuses. I can't discredit that either. But to me, the bigger issue is what we've seen on the right, specifically January 6th. Plato called democracy a touching off point for tyranny. Plato called democracy a touching off point for tyranny. And Machiavelli worried of a prince, or a demagogue-like figure who would lie to the masses and use his power for his own gain, And there's a lot of parallels I could see right now. Republics, obviously an iteration, an evolution of direct democracy being when people directly vote, people directly have a say, republics where you elect people. Republics were meant to be a check on that. They were meant to be a check on mob rule and kind of a violence of the masses. In the U.S., we vote for elected officials who make the decisions based on what we want, in theory. And to me, that seemed like something the founders knew was necessary. I've talked about the founding fathers a little bit today. The founding fathers viewed human nature as unable to be changed. They were positive on humans, generally speaking, but they knew in some ways we are corrupt. And I think that is why they set out a confusing set of checks and balances to keep us in order and keep us from the issues of the time, which they saw in Great Britain and in a lot of Europe. And as of late, I worry those checks may be eroding. And those in power may question the checks in the first place. Donald Trump and a lot of the Steve Bannons, the Stephen Millers, the people who don't really like the system and they're questioning it, It's like, at this point, even if we elect officials who are supposed to represent us, do we know what is right? Are some elected officials afraid of the mob? Afraid to lose their job? George Will, a great Republican thinker, in my opinion, he said that a lot of these Republicans are afraid of their voters. I get that. It's not good, but that to me seems like not what the founding fathers tried to create with this republic bogged down checks and balances system. And look, Trump is a narcissist. To be honest, if you're a narcissist, losing an election that was nationally televised is probably the worst thing that could happen to your ego. Trump lost the competition, and now he wants to bend its rules. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think he actually cares much about the country or politics. He cares about himself, but he's found somewhat of a vacuum that he likes the energy that's coming from it. I've been reading Anne Applebaum's book, Twilight of Democracy. If you haven't read it, check it out. If you haven't read her other work, check it out. She is extremely intelligent. And it's kind of an alarming book that looks at Poland, Hungary, Great Britain, Spain, and the United States, and how there's these illiberal tendencies that are growing. It's not the first book on it, but I think it's the best. But she brings up a very good point on how leaders can lean towards authoritarianism and inevitably fascism. She mentions that leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Boris Johnson in the UK, Abascal in Spain, who's not the prime minister or president, but he's the leader of Vox, which is a very neo-fascist party. And then she also brings up Trump. And what she says is that all of these people seem to loathe the system in which they inhabit. They don't like their country. As much as they're patriotic on paper, they don't like their country or the systems. Basically, they hate the system and don't respect it. Why work? Why work in it when you can change it to what you want? All of these leaders have appealed to some form of a cultural despair, whether it was Brexit, making America great again, Spain's old imperial past, the power that the Hungarians might have had under the Soviet Union. They all apply to a time when they perceived things as better, even if they weren't. And Applebaum mentions that really just half-truths and conspiracies can help leaders like the above mentioned get power. Sorry, we got a motorcycle going there. That was lovely, blasting that. But basically she says that, you don't need just propaganda and full lies when you have conspiracies that muddle the waters and confuse people. To me, it seems like populism doesn't like nuance or complexity, right? So a simple or a conspiracy or a lie is dangerous. I'm just mind blown that Trump controls the party like he does, but you have to look at the people voting for him, unfortunately. And, lastly, to me, it seems like we're kind of at a tough spot right here because I voted for Joe Biden, hoping for some semblance of normality, centrism, and just trying to get the country moving again. And I really think the Democrats need to step it up. At first, Biden was looking good. Vaccination was going up. There was a new round of stimulus. But he is floundering. And, I just really worry that by 2024, some Americans will be sick of this administration and just want the other party. That seems to happen. What if COVID gets worse? What if there's another economic catastrophe? What if we have a conflict overseas? There's so many question marks. And the Democrats don't seem politically capable of being a better alternative. There's the debt ceiling debate, which obviously Republicans are just blocking it, which is morally atrocious and just bad for everyone. But I'm not seeing any big name Democrat who's willing to kind of bridge the gaps, to be a leader, who wants to bridge the divide in their own party between progressives and moderates and the corporatists like, Sinema and Joe Manchin. Biden is busy. I get it. He's president. But the Democrats can't vote against their own bill. They need to be uniform. The Republicans all get in line and do what they need to do. Even if they have Trump, which I'm not saying is a good thing. But as Charlie Sykes said on the Bulwark podcast, I think it was yesterday, he said Democrats can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's what we're seeing with all these infrastructure bills, the reconciliation, the debt ceiling, everything is that Democrats are looking for perfect when they just need to be good enough. And I know that's a sad reality, but if we want to keep the Trumpism out of our politics, we need to give people a better alternative. And right now, there's not a great alternative. If the Democrats keep failing on legislative wins, it will help Republicans. I just think that Democrats and the remaining sane Republicans need to remember that bipartisanship in general could get us out of this. Americans have lost faith in their institutions. My first day of my public administration class, that was what we talked about, is why go into a field like this, crafting public policy, administrating public policy, when most Americans don't even think it works. But we have to remember is that authoritarians use that grievance with our institutions to turn us against them. So we need to be careful, and we need it to work. And for that to happen, we can't let perfect get in the way of the better good. So on that, I thank you guys for listening. Hopefully my ranting at least brought some clarity. Like I said, it's usually going to be interviews or conversations with a guest. But today I just wanted to start off with my thoughts. It's been a couple months since I've podcasted last, and there's a lot to cover. So I thank you guys. Again, this episode will be on Podbean solely, but it'll be available on Apple Podcasts soon, Spotify, and all that jazz. We're just getting started. The move to Chicago has been a little hectic. I don't recommend moving. It's always chaos. But anyways, thank you for listening. Let me know. Is it inevitable that we're going to see some sort of Democratic chaos, or can we still stop it? Thanks, guys. Have a great night.